Okay, let's talk a little bit about lean today. And I think lean is one of the topics or terminology that is, there's probably the most confusion out there on what it actually means. I listen to a lot of people who I think are probably not very educated in what lean is, tell me about how lean doesn't fit in their organization and what they think that lean is really trying to do, trying to accomplish. And it usually seems like most often they have a misunderstanding about what lean is. If you're not familiar with it, lean is credited to the Toyota Motor Company, Toyota Production System, sometimes what it's called. This guy here, I got a little quote from him, Taiichi Ohno, who was the president of Toyota Motor Company, that's kind of the founder of lean. And I think this is a good sentence to think about. Above all, one of our most important purposes was increased productivity and reduce costs. So that's what lean is about. And I always say, don't be fooled by all these Japanese terminology or these big words or consultants that try to put forth all the smoke and mirrors. It's really just about reducing cost and kind of work smart, not hard, being efficient with your resources. And when you think about it like that, I think most people would say, gee, that's applicable to my business environment. We need to be efficient. We need to work smart. We need to be lean, which if you think about like food, like meats, being lean is to have very little fat. And in your business, you would say, I'd like to have very little fat or very little waste. You might hear some other terminology associated with lean. Again, Toyota Production System is often used as a synonym because that's really where it was created first. One-piece flow or continuous flow, and we'll do some work that might help explain that. Just in time, some of you might remember, in the 80s, that was kind of the buzzword that you need to be a just-in-time operation, and that is very much synonymous with lean, and we'll talk some about why being a just-in-time operation makes you a lean facility. What does that have to do with trimming the fat or being more efficient? And then pull systems or Kanbans. We'll look at a real simple type of pull system, which is a Kanban. So you might hear any of those terms used, and someone is talking basically about the same kind of thing. Let's see. One question I often have is, does this really apply to our industry? I do quite a bit of consulting, and most of my consulting work is either lean implementations or Six Sigma. What you see more and more is a lot of companies today try to blend the two, lean and Six Sigma together. But a starting question that you should have is this applicable to my business? And so let's just see sort of what's out there. So here's some of what's out there. This is a website, Lean Construction Institute. So obviously whole organizations that are dedicated to promoting lean concepts in a building and construction environment. And here's the source of all information in America, right? If Wikipedia has it, then it has to be real. Here's an entry in Wikipedia about lean construction, kind of talks about how it progressed and what it really means. Here's one place we look in the academic world, in the universities, is there an academic journal that's dedicated to a particular topic? And here's a Lean Construction Journal, which is an academic journal. Academic journal just dedicated to lean construction techniques. And last place I just went to Amazon and sort of look and see what kind of books are out there. And you see a lot of different books that have to do with lean and construction. So I think there's certainly good evidence that people out there have found many of the principles of lean that apply in the construction world. So let's see, well, what is lean really about? Goals of lean is to eliminate waste. And when you think about food, like meats, eliminating the waste on a cut of meat is to eliminate the fat. And I think that's applicable in business. When you talk about waste in a business, it's the fat that you want to get rid of. Also eliminate process variability. In business, we really don't like variability. We like things to be consistent, and as managers, that makes our life easier. We can control things when they're consistent. In terms of output, so if I perform the same process 2 times, or if I have 2 different people perform the process, I want the output to be the same. It should be consistent. Same way with time. If I have a task that needs to be done, and I do that task over and over, I need the amount of time that it takes to perform that task to be consistent, even if it's performed by different people. Again, as a manager, it's hard to manage and plan if you don't know what to expect, and consistency gives you that what to expect. Also, Lean has this concept of having a flexible system that's capable of meeting changing needs, and I think that's certainly a situation in a construction industry that, although on one level you might say every project is similar, on another level I think you would definitely say every project is different. And Lean, again, is a lot like Six Sigma in that it is really just a collection of lots of different tools, where Six Sigma tools focus on improving quality, reducing defects. Lean tools usually focus more on efficiency and productivity. That's why it fits very well with the module that we just finished on productivity and capacity. So let's see what some of this collection of tools might be. Value stream mapping. Some of you probably are already familiar with either flow charting or process mapping. Value stream mapping maybe takes a flow chart or a process map and puts a little bit more information on it. One of the key pieces of information it tries to put on it is this step value added or is this step non-value added according to a customer? We'll see what that means here in just a few minutes. But on a real basic level, you're really just talking about identifying all the steps in a process and really asking yourself or asking your customer, does that add value? And I think many of you would probably look at the things you do during the day or things that are done within your company and say, man, we got a lot of non-value added steps. Another tool is this pull system or Kanban, and we'll see what that is. It's just a technique to control the amount of work that's in a system. Sometimes we use it for inventory. Setup reductions, I think, are certainly going to be applicable in the construction world. It has to do with how much time it takes when you move from one task to another and how much time it takes you to get started back up doing meaningful work. Visual controls, which sometimes we call 5S systems. Some companies throw safety in as a 6th S and say they have a 6S system. It is really just a workplace organization. It's how to keep your workplace organized. Definitely applies in the construction world. Tack times, cycle time, capacity planning, just trying to figure out how long should a task take. One that you might not be familiar with, spaghetti diagrams. I'll just kind of verbally describe that. When you have a task that needs to be done and you have to go a lot of places, you have to walk a lot or drive a lot in order to complete a task, spaghetti diagram is a great visual illustration of that. What you do is you just take like a CAD layout of your facility or of your work area, and you just take yarn and push pins, and you say, all right, when you start the process, where are you? And then where do you have to go? And you take the yarn and you just stretch it out into all the steps. Point of use storage has to do with where we store materials and trying to get them as close to where they're actually going to be used. Mistake proofing, the Japanese term there is poka-yoke, you may have heard of. Just trying to make your processes foolproof, mistake-proof. Cause and effect diagram or fishbone diagram or Ishikawa diagram is really a good tool for trying to identify what are the causes or what are the reasons for an effect, usually used for a negative effect, but we'll see how to use one for a positive effect. Efficiency, we've already done some of the work on that, process cycle time, efficiency, and labor efficiency. Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, we'll look at that. There are a lot of tools available in this Lean toolkit. I think just like a craftsman, a carpenter, or an electrician can have a lot of tools available. The challenge is knowing which tool to use in a given situation and knowing how to actually use the tool. So one of the things that the folks that develop Lean said is, you're always looking for waste. I mean, that's really the focus, is I want to cut the waste out of my operation. And they said, look, there's some kind of common places to look for waste or some common types of waste. One of them is just overproduction or early production. So starting a job early or producing more than really what is needed, that's kind of just in case inventory or just in case timing. In other words, I produce a little extra material or I start a little bit early just in case there's a problem. And what that basically says is that I acknowledge that there are problems, and rather than fixing the problem, I'm going to have insurance against the problem. And this is really a different mindset and a different way of thinking about how to run a business. It's rather than have insurance, it's let's see what the problems are and eliminate the problems. Waiting is a source of waste. I think in the construction world, this is probably a huge source of waste. Waiting on information, waiting on materials, waiting on other trades to complete their portion of the work so that you can get in and perform your portion of the work. That's a source of waste. I mean, people are on the clock, machinery's on the clock, and when it's sitting waiting idle, then your productivity goes down and your costs go up. Transportation, so handling more than once, any kind of delays in moving materials. Again, I think this is very applicable in the construction world because you do so much of moving equipment. Unlike in a manufacturing plant where we leave the equipment stationary, um, and we basically leave the workers stationary and we bring the parts to them. In the construction world, it's the opposite typically, that the workers and all the materials have to go to the job site. So transportation obviously is a big issue there. Inventory, any kind of excess inventory is a source of waste. Any kind of excess motion, so any movement of equipment or people that does not add value is a source of waste. Over processing, unnecessary steps. Some of you that are in large companies probably see a lot of sign-offs and a lot of approvals that really represent over processing, that it's really not a safety net. The people who are doing the approvals and the sign-offs are just kind of clerking through, and it's really not adding value. Any defect is a source of waste because we wasted material and we wasted man hours for something that's not sellable to the customer. We have these same sources of waste that we can kind of look at from an office standpoint. So, if you're not in a manufacturing facility, you're not out in the field in construction, and you say, well, see, I don't think really lean applies to me. What we find are the same sources of waste in an office setting. They just sort of show up a little bit differently. So one of these principles that has to do with lean has to do with just specifying your value. And the key here is that customers determine value. Managers don't determine value, and vice presidents don't determine value, and your boss doesn't determine value. The customer determines value. The customer decides what it is that they would be willing to pay for if they knew that it was being done. And suppliers have to provide products and services that customers need. It has to do with outcomes, the product features, how the product actually functions, and what it's capable of. And then this last sentence here, anything that doesn't add value is waste. And that's really a tough one for a lot of people to accept when you start looking at what's being done in business and identifying steps and saying that is waste. And the process map or the value stream map or the flow chart is, I think, probably one of the best tools to getting at where you have value added and non-value added steps. And we'll do a little bit, we'll just sort of touch on process mapping. It is a very common technique that's out there. Again, I think it's probably one of the more useful techniques when you start talking about lean and trying to identify where do we have unnecessary steps. Here's my consulting partner. You're actually going to take a class from him eventually. This is Dr. Bullington at a project that we were doing. We were doing process mapping, and this was actually a group of social service workers. So you might wonder, what do a couple engineers that teach operations management know about social services? And the answer was nothing. We didn't know anything about social services, but we did know about process mapping, and we did know about identifying waste. And that's what this session was about. It was mapping their processes and identifying the value added and non-value added steps. And a process map often looks ugly when you begin. Here is an example of the process map we were making. Just butcher paper and permanent markers and post-it notes and scribbling on the page, trying to identify what happens in each step in a process.